You're listening to Erskine Veterans Radio. Good afternoon, I'm Ian Brannan. My special guest this week is someone who is no stranger to Erskine, particularly at the Erskine home in Glasgow, because she's the daughter of one of our previous residents, and she's written a book that tells everybody all about her journey with her dad and his fight against dementia. The book is called Because I Know Who He Is, and she's going to tell us a lot more about the story behind it. She is Sarah Smith. Very pleased to welcome her to Erskine Veterans Radio. Sarah, welcome to Erskine Veterans Radio. Start, please, by telling us about how this book came about and yours and your family's connection to Erskine.
Well, actually, way before my dad became ill, he was quite a big donor to Erskine. We run a charitable foundation, and Erskine's one of the places that we donate to. And then when I realised things were getting quite bad with the dementia, I obviously thought I need to look into residential care for him. So I went to view various places, and I went to see Erskine one day, and the minute I walked in, I actually just burst into tears because I knew this was the right place for him. And you know, from then on, that's been my association with them, because I used to go and visit him pretty much every single day. Yeah,
and it is a unique environment, as we know, and we'll talk more about that. But what led you then to writing this book? How did the initial idea come about?
Well, because of the dreaded COVID and lockdown, I was just sitting in the garden one day and I thought, how am I going to occupy my mind? Because when Dad was ill, I had said that I would do everything I possibly could to raise awareness, raise money for research into Alzheimer's, dementia. But then COVID hit and I couldn't be a volunteer. My dog Lottie couldn't be the pet therapy dog. I've got 3 children and I had them at home for lockdown, and then they went back to university or work. And I just thought, how am I going to occupy my head? And it was to say it wasn't intended to be a book isn't strictly true, but I thought I would just write down a kind of memoir of things. And in a way it was, I suppose, started off as a form of catharsis, because when you're going through that illness with somebody, you just have to kind of do what you can every day, and you don't actually maybe take the time to reflect and go, oh my God, this has happened or that's happened. And so I just started to write it, and it was the second lockdown I actually started to write it, and that's when I had more time, and I found that it was, I wouldn't like to say relatively easy to do so, but I could remember clear as a bell every single thing that happened, and it just became a book. And as I said, promised my dad that I would do everything I could, and when I got to the end of writing what I would call the manuscript, I just said to myself, if you're going to do what you promised Dad, then you have to send it off to publishers. So I did, and to my surprise, people wanted to publish it.
And here you are now. And Erskine, of course, features quite prominently in the book, doesn't it? You do talk about Erskine specifically in this.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just about my dad's journey. It's about our family's journey, but everything else that I saw. And residential care has quite a big stigma attached to it. I mean, I had people say to me, oh, I hear you've put your dad in a home. And I hate that phrase. You know, by the time somebody gets to the point where they realise they can no longer cope themselves, you know, when they come to the moving in team at Erskine, they're pretty much broken, because you do feel like you've betrayed trust. I mean, my dad lived 10 minutes up the road from the Glasgow home, and here I was coming to view it, putting his name down, you know. But, dementia is such a complicated disease that the best care you can give someone that you love when it gets to that point is, in my opinion, residential care. And that's just not for the care of the sufferer, it's the care of the family as well, because I had no comprehension of dementia when I first embarked on this journey with my dad, and I couldn't have got through it without all the staff at Erskine, quite honestly.
It is such a tough disease to go through for everyone, but particularly the families, and as you lose that connection. And the book is called Because I Know Who He Is, and obviously you've touched on the fact about dementia being involved there, and I guess that obviously is a big part of the theme of the book then, in terms of your memories of your dad and what he went through.
Well, I called it that because people used to say to me, why do you keep going to see him every day if he doesn't know who you are? And that was always my answer, because I know who he is. He's my dad. And you say you lose connection, you lose a connection that was 100% at a time. But actually, I believe the person suffering still retains the bare bones of their personality. It might be confused and foggy, but right up till the end, there was a period in time when my dad probably didn't know who I was, and there's a chapter in the book called The Wee Girl with the Dog, because that's how he used to refer to me. But I got, his last words to me were very, very clear that he knew exactly who I was, and he hadn't spoken since for about 9 months, probably hadn't spoken for about 3 months, and all of a sudden he had this lucid moment which I'd been told will happen, and I knew. And to me, it didn't really matter when we were going through that sort of time when he maybe wasn't very sure. What I did know for certainty was that he knew I was someone special, and that was good enough for me.
Tell us a bit about your dad, because you mentioned he was a big supporter of Erskine, but what was the man that you knew from before all of this illness started?
Well, my dad was a businessman, and very, very bright. He was called the numbers man in Glasgow because his financial mathematical acumen was so great that he went in and saved a lot of charities. He was a great sportsman, and he loved his rugby and his cricket. He spent his whole life in Glasgow. And by the mid-80s, he and my mum set up what's called the Mann Foundation, because they'd got a point in their lives when they felt they could give back. And, they felt quite strongly, if you get to a certain point when, you're comfortable, you should give back. So he received a CBE from, it was actually the Lord Provost, because he was too ill to go, on the 15th of December 2017, the day before he entered Erskine, for services to charities, the arts, sports, recreation. He lived his life really supporting other people. And, Dad was always someone that would say to us as children, you've got to be the best you can be. So he wasn't, short to say, well, I think you could do better or whatever. But everybody in Glasgow knew him to be a very fair man. And he's someone that I'm very proud of. And it's another thing I want to highlight. It doesn't matter how intelligent you are, how successful you are. This disease, it's a leveller. There's nothing you can do, in my opinion, to stop it from happening. But it's how you cope with somebody and make what's a horrendous journey one that's as comfortable and possibly happy. I mean, I've read somewhere that if you've met one person with dementia, you've only met one person with dementia. By that, I mean that everyone's journey is completely different. Some people are content, some people are not. Dad, everybody knows he did not like it in Erskine one little bit, because he didn't understand he was ill, and he had a suitcase packed every day for 18 months until he could no longer do it. He thought he was living in a private members club with me abroad. And, it's okay to tell white lies, because if that's what keeps somebody happy. So every time I left, I would say I was going to walk the dog. He did know I had 3 children, so that was, a plausible excuse, if you like, for me to leave. But he's just somebody that people, with a great sense of humour, always had a twinkle in his eye, and he lived his life devoted to other people, I would say. And I never ever thought this would happen to him. We have lots of other diseases that run in the family, but it never crossed my mind this would happen, ever. And
you talk about coping with it. How did you cope with it? Because it must have been a huge shock to take in that how this was going to develop and affect him, and change all of your lives.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think with dementia, you don't actually get diagnosed till you're quite far down the line, because there's all these questions: are they just old? Are they forgetful? And my dad never once believed that he was unwell. So when we tried to help, he didn't want help. And then finally, we managed to get him help, and he was diagnosed. He actually had a thing called Lewy bodies dementia, which is probably the most aggressive form of dementia you can get. And I coped really because I had no choice but to. He relied, for someone who was so strong and independent, he relied so heavily on me to be there every day. And, in some ways, I think he thought maybe I was a prison guard, because, I'd be going home and he wasn't getting to go home. But as I said to you earlier on, Ian, really, I believe one of the reasons I coped as well as I did, inverted commas, was because of the staff and the carers at Erskine who see it every day, all day. And they would say to me, you know, it's okay to be upset, it's okay to be sad, you know, this is normal, but try this approach. So if you can enter inside the head of the person who's suffering, then I think you can cope better, you know. So my dad was playing rugby in his head in the last few months of his life. So I'd go in and, you know, he'd say he'd be playing rugby, and I said, oh good, did you score a try? I just went along with it, because to say to somebody, no, that's not right, is the wrong way to approach it. You know, I believe firmly that even when you're coming towards the end of your illness, they still know something's not right. They're not 100% sure as to what it is, but it must be very frightening. So to have somebody come in and contradict you it's the wrong approach. You know, it's just all about making them feel safe. And that's what everybody in Erskine did for not just Dad, but for me. I could walk home at night and know that he didn't sleep, for instance. So you can ask any of the carers. I mean, he barely used his bed until he had to. But he was up in the middle of the night, he'd get tea and toast, he'd have someone to talk to. All the things he didn't have when he was living on his own and I was going in every day, because they don't have any idea about time. So, yeah, to answer the question, how did I cope? Because I had to, but I have 2 brothers, I have a husband, all of whom were very supportive of me, and they just knew that this is what I wanted to do. I think time's the greatest gift you can give anyone, so I just decided to spend as much time with Dad as I could. You know, partly while he knew who I was, but because I think, you know, I see a lot of people who maybe don't get visitors, and we lock our old people away in inverted commas, and you know, there's people on Dad's floor that fought in the D-Day landings. You know, for me, it's an honour and a privilege to have met these people and to still meet them today.
Your journey, obviously quite painful, but you do have one chapter which talks about some silver linings. And can you elaborate on that, though? Because, as you say, you know, it is a painful journey, but there probably were some smiles along the way for you.
There were a lot of smiles, and I want to convey this to people, that it is sad and it's upsetting, but Dad and I still had laughs, you know, and as we do with all our residents today. But for me, you know, there were loads of silver linings. One being that I got to spend all that time with him. 2, that we didn't have to live through this COVID thing, you know, together, because he would never have understood why the wee girl and the dog wasn't coming. It's led me to a place in my life where I thought, this is where I want to be. I want to be involved with people with dementia. And I'd never thought about that before. I've written a book, you know. There are loads of silver linings, and, you know, as I say, it was painful. It still is very painful today. But, you know, we did have lots of happy times as well. And that's, you know, they have a great activities team at Erskine. That's where I'm involved. I work with the activities team. And, you know, just to see people laughing and smiling and being well cared for, when a lot of people maybe could be sitting in the house on their own and nobody bothering about them. So although, you know, I love volunteering, I get a lot more out of it, I can assure you, than I put into it, because I walk home every day with a wee spring in my step. Think how lovely these people are.
Tell us about the book then. What's it called, and where can we get it? That would be the big question.
Because I Know Who He Is the title. It is available on Amazon, Waterstones, Foyles, and Blackwalls. So
you're in the big bookshops there. Then it's you're a proper produced, published author.
I've still got to sell it.
Well, what do you hope to achieve through the book? Obviously, it's been a process for yourself to be involved in it. But what do you hope the book actually will achieve for people who read it?
Well, raising awareness of the disease, and I know it's very topical at the moment, but you know, 15 years ago it wasn't really spoken about. I don't like to use the word guide because I think it sounds a bit pretentious, but I really hope it will help other people who are embarking on or on that journey. Because when I first entered it, I had no idea what would happen. And, you know, people who maybe are at sort of an early stage of it might pick up a few chapters and say, well, that's enough for me at the moment. I don't want to read further, and then they might get further down the line and think, well, what did that woman say? So helping others is, quite a big thing. Again, that sounds a bit grand, but I really do hope those who have read it so far and have been through the experience have said it absolutely resonates 100%. And I'm not wishing to blow my own trumpet, but most people who have read it in one sitting. They've just found it really quite compulsive, I suppose. I'm also really wanting to raise awareness of how good residential care can be, because I do feel very strongly that there's a stigma attached to it, and our carers, in my opinion, are not really very well valued. And the job that they do, and I'm talking, we've got some carers who are 18, what they do for people like my dad and all the other residents is unbelievable. A lot of adults might balk at some of the jobs they have to do, so I can never do that, but these people do it. And as you'll be aware, there's a bit of a crisis in social care at the moment. I don't think you can just say one day, okay, I'll be a carer. You have to be a carer in your heart. And that's what I saw day in, day out when I was visiting Dad at Erskine, that they didn't just care for the residents, they love the residents, and they tap into each person individually. So if you've been a businessman like Dad used to say to me, and he went around firing most of the staff regularly. So, right, you're fired, you're doing a rubbish job. But he would complain because the bars and restaurants, as he saw them, weren't busy. So as in where they had their meals. So we came up with an idea where we would give Dad some false accounts and say, well, you're good at this, Dad. Why don't you sort the business out? So how to cope with it. You can still have a happy, loving relationship. And, as I say, to raise awareness how good residential care can be. I'm really quite passionate about that, because a lot of people struggle, and in the last couple of years, people probably really have struggled because they're frightened to place somebody in residential care because they may not get to visit them. But you've got to be aware as well that, my mum is no longer alive, so it was me that was doing it. But if it was my mum, she would have been in her 80s as well. It's a lot for people to cope with. And yeah, just to raise the profile of how good it is.
Well, the very best of luck with it, and hopefully the sales do go well, and you achieve all of those things. But before you go, obviously we've talked about the experience that you've gone through. What advice would you have for someone who is going through the same experience in their lives, or maybe even just setting out on that journey, and they've received the news that one of their loved ones is going to be heading down this route and fighting dementia? What would you say, and what would you advise them to do?
Just to enter inside their head, and don't contradict them. Reassure yourself that it's okay to tell little lies. Like Dad would sometimes say to me, I'm going to go now, Dad. And he would sometimes say, well, how long would you be? How long are you going to be? And I never said tomorrow, because from his perspective, how come it's okay for me to leave but not him? So I would say an hour, and sometimes, oh no, that's too much. 10 minutes? Okay then. Because I knew within 10 minutes he'd have forgotten that I'd said 10 minutes. So just to enter into their world. And I learnt a lot of family stories from my dad, because they say dementia's like, the brain is like, you've got layers of sand and it goes right down to the concrete. So the layers of sand are the most recent memories and the concrete are the oldest ones. So clearly when Dad talked about going home and being with his family, he wasn't really talking about being with me and my two brothers, because he even forgot who my mum was, because she passed 25 years ago. He was talking about being with his mum and dad and going back to the flat that he lived in as a child and just living in that world. And we spent hours and hours going over old photographs, and he would say, oh, that was that house. And when I was in my 20s, like most people, you're not that interested in what your parents did when they were in their 40s. So he taught me a lot, actually. And, he gave me, you're saying, how did you cope? I mean, I was with him right up until the end, and I was petrified that I wouldn't be able to cope with that. But he gave me the strength to do that. And, as I say, I'm very grateful to everyone at Erskine who cared for him so beautifully, and what they still do today. And if I didn't care passionately, I wouldn't be giving my time up 2 or 3 days a week to do so. So yeah, just enter into their world, be kind and gentle, because it is a very frustrating disease to deal with. But get into their head, and it's not going to be without tears. Of course, there's going to be lots of tears, but you can cope a little bit better if you just go along with it.
And the work now that you're doing with Erskine, tell us about that, some of the events and the activities that you're involved in organising with Erskine, particularly in Glasgow.
Well, yesterday we had the big star called Christian, who was a big singer in the sort of 50s, 60s and 70s, came in. His actual name's Chris McClure, and he supports Erskine quite a bit. So he came in yesterday, and honestly, I say he had them dancing in the aisles. Not quite, because a lot of people are wheelchair bound, but, they loved it. We have people from the Royal Conservatoire that come in for concerts, and it can be as much as just sitting and speaking to somebody on a one-to-one basis, because not everyone's able to participate in a group basis. So it's just, we had, I think in the main Erskine, I can't remember what it's called, the big activity room. We've got one in the Glasgow home called The Bridge, and it's only open 3 days a week at the moment because of COVID. But the other 2 days a week, was it last Wednesday, we did lots of Scottish songs. And to see people who very often don't speak come alive and actually be able to sing the songs is just amazing. So it's obviously everything's tailored to a certain generation because that's what sparks the memories. But we had a Halloween party, they were ducking for apples, lots of things. So I love it. And, they're all just such special people. They really are. Carers and residents.
And this time of year as well, of course, moving in towards December and Christmas time must be a nice time of the year where you can get people together, hopefully, and get ready with some little parties and activities down with that theme as well.
Yes, come sort of December, it'll be really busy with that. Each floor has their own separate day for Christmas lunch. We've got pantomime coming up, along. The people that support Erskine are great supporters of it. And, it's just lovely to see. And as I say, we watched Still Game the other day. And you wouldn't believe the laughter that was, some of the most inappropriate, you think, oh my God. But, the old stuff, there's a channel called Talking Pictures, which is Channel 81. And it was a resident in my dad's home called Andy that put me onto that. And so that's films from the 1930s about to the 1960s. And it could be just sitting and watching a film with people and you could just see it sparked a memory. And for me just to observe it, I just love it, never mind being a part of it. And I'm very grateful. And that's why I want to make sure that people really do understand that the care that people get in residential care is the best care. And it can bring you your relationship back with the person that's ill, because very often when you're caring for them, they perceive it as that you're telling them what to do and you can't do this and you've got to do that. But actually I could walk home at 5 o'clock of an evening and know that Dad was happy. And on most days he'd be quite happy to see me because, he was quite frustrated. I mean, I don't think he would mind me saying that. He was quite frustrated, by being there. But, there's a chapter called The Wee Girl with the Dog, and that's written about when I went on my honeymoon. I remarried a few years ago. And basically it was awful, but he kept asking, when's the wee girl with the dog coming back? He didn't want to get changed until the wee girl with the dog came back, So they're all wonderful people.
Well, thanks very much for sharing your story, Sarah, and all the best with the book. I'm sure it'll be a great success, and thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks very much for having me, Ian.
Our pleasure. And finally, I'll leave it over to you to pick a song to play us out. What should we play for you, Sarah?
Well, it's probably quite a sad song, but it's one that's very meaningful to me. It's Ed Sheeran's Supermarket Flowers. And my dad and I listened to that a lot. And it was actually on when he passed. And I had it sung at his funeral, played on the piano and sung live. Because there's a line that says, when God takes you back, he'll say, hallelujah, you're home. As in one of the chapter titles, The Road Home. So I just got the singer to transpose the word mum to dad. So it's a special song. So if you want to play that, that would be lovely. Thank you.